Alright, draft physics video. Ken Wheeler guy. Yeah, just for fun. So he's going to explain quantum. So anyway, I would like to say on this subject, I would like to debate somebody. Somebody with balls and such. Or, a non-skanky cunt. And, yeah, I'd like to see that happen. But this whole thing, this controversy between wave and particle, and more specifically, what Ken is saying, there's grains of truth in the sense that bent space would be a lot like an ether, a mechanism. Virtual photons, another thing used in the math of quantum mechanics. They create them and then destroy them, through a conservation of energy gimmick. But regardless, they're sort of taking the place of an ether, something that transmits force. A lot of talk about stuff like vector spaces, or quantum field theory, where the idea of you have a location in space that has a certain number, and what that number would represent is the density of the ether in that location. You could almost argue if it was a static ether. And then there's my theory, which is much better than all this nonsense, and just quantizes the force and creates an active ether, in the sense that the ether is a real thing. It's actually photons. And photons are what gravity is, and photons are what magnetism is. They have everything in common with photons in terms of how they function. There's nothing dissimilar between gravity and magnetism to a photon. The only thing that's dissimilar, we can see photons, we can't see gravity and magnetism. But their force reality is exactly the same. Their profile, so to speak. They don't have anything uncommon, except the fact that the traditional photons, as described on the electromagnetic spectrum, radio waves to cosmic rays, those photons, most of them are invisible actually, and they come at a frequency and are substantially perceived as less powerful than the magnetic electrical force, EMF, and that is just because of the density. Photons at a frequency is a rare circumstance for the quanta. The common quanta is in the form of gravity and magnetism. That's where 99.99% of them are. So anyway, just by making an active ether, then you can explain gravity, then you can explain magnetism. Ken's stuck with a big problem. His ether theory doesn't give you any source of the energy. So when he talks about the hyperboloid inside the magnet, he doesn't have any explanation for where the energy for all that movement comes from. When he talks about gravity, he calls it magnetic, calls it a magnetic or electric phenomenon, and again, no explanation of the actual force. Where's the movement coming from? Where's the energy for that movement coming from? Clearly Einstein doesn't do that either. He creates a fake matrix of space-time and separates it as a separate dimension, and therefore doesn't have to account for it in the 3 dimensions of the energy we know of. And that's the simple trick of it. Space-time is a trick. It takes the energy problem of gravity, because you can't find it. Can't find the sun getting weaker because it's creating gravity. Can't see where the earth gets smaller because it's creating gravity. But you don't have to when you just call it a separate dimension. And that's really the difference here. The science is close to the same. Alright, that's the wrong way to say it. There's obviously nothing in common in a fundamental perception way. So that's sort of what this is. It's bent perception, not bent space. Bent space is only a little bit of the problem. Bent perception is the real big problem. And I'm just saying that I'm just arguing for the point that whatever he says that is reasonable, which is duality is idiotic and different things, those are reasonable statements. His conclusion that there's some dead ether out there, like a lake, okay, with no waves in it, that things wave across or wave through, is fundamentally flawed because it doesn't acknowledge the fact that this entity, this lake we're swimming in, is pushing us down into the earth, and it does force magnets together and apart. It is the energy in that force, and especially when you trap it inside of something like a ball of uranium, boom, that it's polarization, and you know, and the key element of all of this is that we're not just perturbations through this medium or through this field of energy. We're collections of the energy of a specific kind, namely electrons and protons, that have segregated one polarization from another polarization, and that's the nature of the material universe. And that's the way it is, people. It's going to be proven, so you can call me all kinds of names and an idiot and all this shit, but that's the truth. And it fixes everything. It fixes the duality problem. It gets rid of the fake dimensions. It explains time dilation. It explains magnetism. It explains the nuclear forces. It explains gravity. It's all covered by just acknowledging that the universe is full of energy, and most of it you don't see, and that the stuff you are seeing is the stuff that's polarized, and that's why it's reflecting light, and why it appears to have mass. I don't want to take a picture. Yeah, anyway. Alright, so let's play. So I haven't played this yet, and we probably won't play much of it because he's just going to go on some sort of insulting tirade, and he really won't say anything.
No.
That's
there's an ancient
nature of the creep.
Parable that says that the fool cuts himself with his own tongue. Oh my goodness,
right.
How right that is. So right now, I'm going to use quantum theory to destroy quantum theory.
I should be able to use that. Alright, so yeah, that's all very cute. So yes, cliche, science by cliche, no point. Alright, now we're going to start with some sort of word game. I'm going to destroy quantum theory with quantum theory. Okay, fine. I don't think so.
Here we got Bohr and Planck and
They all were very different people with very different theories, so there's no point. If you're going to say Bohr and then you're going to say Einstein in the same sentence, you're really going to be in trouble. And Planck is an interesting character, because I just found a quote of his, I think, is something like, and it was like Maxwell. Let's see, connected through a net of energy. So, Planck was he tended to like the idea of ether, and certainly Maxwell was in love with it, but he couldn't make it mathematically work, and that's where you just don't pay any attention to the argument, is that a dead ether, a pond with no mechanism inside of it already, no force function, that is a non-energetic ether, doesn't work mathematically. It doesn't explain gravity, and it doesn't explain magnetism. An active ether does, and then it's not an ether. That was another point I wanted to make, is that see, all this has to do with people. They want to have an aggrandized perception of the universe, like the universe is doing something fancy and mysterious, and I guess that's all this is about. It's this love affair with religion. We don't want to accept that we're just bugs. I mean, bugs that can sing and dance, but we're bugs by biology, okay? Most men are their penis, it's just a truth, and a lot of women are just their stomach in terms of chocolate. I mean, you can diagram what we are psychologically. We're just we're engineered machines to be consumers and reproducers, and all of this higher agenda is all because we had this vocabulary thing and could do this bigger concept thing. And the universe isn't here for us to watch or to be awed by. No, it's a crude mechanism. And if you try to imagine what's the simplest way I could make a universe, now the simplest way isn't to create some sort of complex geometry and then have things perturbate through it, in all kinds of wavy ways. Now the simplest mechanism is what appears to be the big universe, which is little things collide into big things and become part of them, and they stick or they bounce. And that's what it's all made out of. And the most simplest universe you can create is to create something that just has a ton of grains of sand. And each grain of sand just happens to be moving the speed of light in a direction and just happens to either be red or blue. And that's it. That's all you need for my diagram of origin. It's about as give me a description of something simpler than that can create all the complexity we have in our universe. It's an incredibly simple device. Polarization, that is reflections perpendicular, a perpendicular change in direction. That's about it. Two colors moving the speed of light, indestructible. Quantum bits. Incredibly simple. What is quantum by definition? By definition, quantum is a fundamental particle, a fundamental element. And you can make it work with something just that simple. A force that moves the speed of light, a force made of little bits, little grains of sand. They all move the speed of light, they all have a straight line vector, they all go from point A to B in a straight line until they hit something polarized. And they have polarization. That's it. What would be a how do you define a simpler first step to the existence of a something rather than nothing? It's about as simple as nothing. It's about as simple as something as you could describe, and yet create something that over time can create this universe.
Cult master. We have Einstein also. We have the cult master Richard Feynman. Tricky Dicky. He's dead now.
Yeah, I mean, all these these cheap insults over and over again. Would you like to be treated this way? Would you like for people to sit there and engage with you in a conversation by just constantly insulting you? And here you're doing it to dead people, which just shows such a lack of any kind of class. I mean, yes, point out where, hey, I think these guys were wrong, or I think they made a mistake, or I think they were ignorant, or I think they were arrogant even. But these constant, cheap, frickin' superficial attacks of just saying, hey, you're bald and fat. I mean, it's just so fucking stupid. I mean, it just makes you sound ignorant.
What does the term quantum mean? It doesn't mean anything. Let's get into the nitty-gritty of the definition.
Well, it does. It means that it's discrete and conservative. And so when they said quantum electrodynamics, they were basically saying the fundamental parts in conjunction with this fundament, the photon, in conjunction with the electron, which is the thing it interacts with most aggressively. It's about quanta and electrons.
Definition of the term quantum. First, let's start off with the connotative implication, and then we'll go to the denotative implication of the term quantum.
Yeah, again, so this parsing of, this verbal verbosity about, let's worry about what kind of definition we're doing. It's either an accurate description or an inaccurate description. So why don't you just cut through the bullshit and give us what you think an accurate description of a quanta would be. My accurate description would be a fundamental element of energy, the fundamental element of the universe, a quanta of energy.
Quantum means quantity, means materialism, i.e. atomism. Quantum.
No, your theory has the same problem, okay? You know the difference between big fat guy and little person, right? Big fat guy, you can tell the difference, that one weighs more. You're quantifying. There's nothing in your physics that doesn't completely rely on quantity. So are you saying there's not a smallest bit of traversable energy in the universe? Are you saying there's something that can convey energy that's smaller than a photon? Go ahead, give us an example of a wave perturbation that's smaller than a photon.
Ultimately is a cult of bumping particles. That's correct.
No, that's not what physics is, and certainly not what quantum mechanics is. So, this is such a... I don't know how you could misunderstand so grotesquely. Okay, yes, they call it wave-particle duality, but quantum mechanics gives almost no regard whatsoever for the particle nature of the energy, except in the fact that they concede that when it hits a target, it's a quantity. All right, but how it gets to the target is entirely controlled by what you might call the ether, by magical forces.
At its very core, quantum is a cult of bumping particles, interactions of particles. Well, everything is just particles, subatomic particles, invisible particles, unicorn particles.
Again, more nonsense. Go ahead. Why don't you point me to the lecture or to the video on the documentary that has been made that talks about particles and that doesn't, in terms of particles creating any kind of, having anything to do with function. Function is completely wave mechanical in terms of what they have perverted it into. Photons are rarely described as elements that move from point A to point B in a straight line.
Things that are fading in and out of nowhere. Completely absurd insanity. Something that even a drunk lunatic hopped up on Vicodin could not even...
Right, I mean, all of this stuff, I mean, again, you waste so much time on all of this hyperbole. I mean, okay, maybe your audience is insipid and silly, and this is all they can do is insult people they don't believe, or people they don't like, or people they disagree with. And maybe that's all they got. They can't make a mechanical argument, so they just do this gratuitous insult shit. But I mean, fuck. I'm calling you on it. I'm saying it's ignorant, it's lazy, and it just makes you seem like a bit of a crank or a kook, because instead of making a real argument, you're just insulting people.
Dream up in a lucid nightmare. Okay, and let's go into the denotative, meaning their own definition of the term quantum. Okay, and then let's use quantum to destroy the premise of quantum. In other words, I'm going to quote Richard Feynman, the cult figurehead of quantum theory. I'm going to use him to destroy his very beloved child.
Yeah, well, whatever. It's not his child in the first place, and you know, his contribution was merely to almost to simplify some of the mathematics, you know, to create an end run around some of the calculus.
Okay. Quantum, a discrete quantity of energy proportional to the magnitude and frequency of the radiation it represents. Actually,
no, see that's their mistake, right? Because we know that we can have forces that don't have frequency, like gravity and like magnetism. Certainly you can't put them to frequency, but they exist without frequency. They exist in the DC form, okay, in the direct form, not what's the interrupted form. And likewise, the quanta that is light is identified by merely the fact that there is a time interval between the occurrence of the quanta of the energy. The energy component arrives at a specific time interval, and that's what defines photons. But it's a loose and lazy definition.
even the people in quantum will tell you that quantum is ultimately about discrete energy.
It's ultimately about the fact that they can identify the energy potential, that it's consistent. Photons have an identifiable energy profile. Yellow doesn't react like blue or like green. The frequency means something. It means a certain amount of energy can be put into the bucket in a certain amount of time. Now, certainly it depends on how much photonic energy you supply. And if you've got 5 laser beams pointing at something, it's more than 1 laser beam pointed. So obviously the mass of photons matters, the volume. But the point is there's a capacity in terms of what the potential is to produce. And you can always produce more energy using high frequency photons than low frequency photons, because in the same given volume and time you'll be able to shove more quanta at the location because you're firing them faster. If there's a hole that's just as big as a bullet and you're shooting bullets through it, obviously the faster you shoot the bullets, the more bullets get through the hole.
By discrete, we mean things that we actually cannot quantize.
No, it means exactly the opposite. That's what discrete means, is that it's exactly the opposite than unidentified. It means it's completely identified. It's an absolute, indestructible, of its own merit thing. It's discrete. It's independent. It's identifiable.
You see, energy has no quantity.
That's not what they're saying. They're saying exactly the opposite. I don't know how you could pervert it into that. I don't know where you got that from. I mean, it's just a silly perversion of the definition. You don't know what discrete means?
Neither does a field, by the way. The key word here is energy, but what they really mean is fields. Quantum is the last...
Yes, exactly. And they're pretty much saying that. And so why are you disagreeing with them? They're turning them all into fields. The Higgs field, the virtual photon, the field of virtual photons, vector space. It's all talk about basically creating a field. So again, they're going the way you're implying the truth is. So why aren't you rewarding them for going that way instead of parsing words and being upset that they won't say the word ether? Because again, they can't. The whole point of virtual photons isn't that they're standing still, is that they're a moving force. The force has to be active. The ether has to have energy in it. That's the only way you can make this thing work.
Latin word for amount, and in modern understanding, it means the smallest possible discrete unit of energy or property.
There you go, the smallest bit of the discrete energy. So again, where did you get the idea that they're undefining it? They're defining it. They're basically calling it, this is Planck energy. This is, you don't go any smaller, you don't go more, you don't go less. This is what it is. This is a photon.
First mention of quantum was Max Planck and the writing mathematical equation of Planck's constant, and it's a relationship of...
Yes, how much quantity is in these different wavelengths of light. But again, you have to understand that the amount has to do with the volume. So it doesn't mean, because, let's see how to say it. I could have a gun that doesn't have bullets in all of the holes, as the little thing spins around. So I only have 3 bullets in it, and I shoot the gun, and 3 bullets come out at the right speed and the right distance from each other, but there's only 3 bullets. There's not 6. Less energy.
Of energy of light, however they call that the photon energy. Of course, there's no such damn thing as a photon.
So again, there's no such damn thing as a photon. It's just kind of denying what's being stated. Now you're saying, I'll say there's no photon because I refuse to accept the word photon as a description of this thing that always lands on a surface or always hits an electron with a precise amount of energy. And I'll just pretend that we can't identify that as something. You want to identify it as what? What do you want to call photons if they're not photons? Well, what's your new word for them? And again, I want to get back to, I wanted to just point out, the problem with an active ether for these people is that they didn't figure out a mechanism that would prevent the active ether from destroying any waves that went through it, right? All the photon waves would get destroyed if the universe was full of active ether. But they didn't really think about if they made it kinetic. And if you make it kinetic, you can make it frictionless. And force can't affect force. And that's exactly what we see in the universe. None of the forces interact with each other. You can only mix a force by putting something in it and having all the forces affect the thing. The thing can create the compromise, the balance between the forces. But the thing has to be there. I could have like photons streaming down from this direction. I could have gravity going this way, and I could have magnetism coming in from the other side. And all those forces will do nothing to each other until I put matter in there. And then the matter will feel each force independently and do the math, so to speak, by moving consistent with all 3 of the forces, and then end up with your product location.
A completely absurd abstraction that, as I showed you in a prior video made like less than a week ago, was invented by a psychopath and a lunatic.
Again, it wasn't. You're not even true, because apparently Compton, who was an incredibly brilliant physicist in the sense he figured out Compton radiation and the whole thing about the atmosphere, doing that chemistry that absorbs all the ions and changes why the sun at sunset goes orange and why the sky is blue and all of that bullshit. So he apparently is the one who used the term in physics for the first time. The fact that some fiction writer used it doesn't have anything to do with physics using it. So again, get it right. There's lots of words in our vocabulary that are used by different people for different purposes. And there's a scientific term, and the scientific term photon was used by Compton.
With a degree in psychology, who was interested in parapsychical research. In other words,
So again, this is a subject now. He's made an entire video devoted to this bullshit, and now he's referenced it in 2 other videos. Like somehow this is evidence that quantum mechanics is wrong, that Einstein's an idiot, that anybody who ever says the word photon is a fool is because some guy used the word photon 80 years ago, and he was a jerk. And because he's a jerk, all of physics is wrong. I mean, you see how fucking imbecilic this argument is? I mean, how can you sit there and be such a pompous, arrogant cunt about how fucking smart you are, and yet this is the kind of lowbrow bullshit argument? If you do this in politics, I mean, people would really, literally just laugh you out of the building. I mean, this is pitiful.
Total wackadoodle nut job crackpot. So the person who invented the term photon, as I showed you in that prior video, was a crackpot. So now,
well, actually, you didn't show us anything. So again, you didn't show your evidence that this is the guy who invented photon, and you certainly didn't show us evidence that he was the first physicist to use the term in any kind of presented physical paper on the subject.
now we actually have the term quantum based upon Planck's constant equation, which is energy equals nu, i.e. Planck's constant, times F, the frequency. Very simple equation.
Yes, it's a very simple equation, but it is deceptive, and I'll say it for like a 3rd time here. The really thing you have to be very careful about that equation is that it doesn't deal with volume. It doesn't deal with the quantity. So it's just giving you an equation for the potential. So you have to understand that it's only true, that equation is only true, is if you have the same amount of light, the same volume, for the same duration. So the same stream or number of quanta. Not number. The same time with the same number of rays, let's say. So the same number of beams, okay, then that equation is accurate. But it's not accurate if you recognize the fact that the only difference between blue light and red light is that red light has more spacing between the quanta, so therefore obviously it's a machine gun firing slower, less bullets will get to the target. Duh. But if they have the same amount of bullets, it's the same amount of energy.
Quantum in reality actually means a field, but there's never been any branch of physics or any branch of quantum mechanics, which of course is not a field, it's not science at all, ever define a field.
Well, again, these are bold statements you make. They actually have field theories, numerous field theories, and Feynman described it as virtual photons in the case of the electrodynamics. I mean, the part that has to do with magnetism and electricity, he uses virtual photons, and then even in atoms they use virtual photons to explain the field properties. So it's always going to be, in my opinion, okay, there's a field of energy, and there's just clumps of polarization in that field. It's always the same amount of energy. It's just that it's clumped in the form of this red and blue segregation. And the more you segregate the red from the blue, the more active the matter becomes.
A field in principle has never and nowhere ever been defined. I will give $1 million to any one of you out there who is a brain-dead idiot And you are, because if you believe this, you're a brain-dead idiot. Oh my God, that's so arrogant.
It's stupid. It's childish. It's petty. It's nonsensical, okay? It's just a goddamn idiotic way to argue. It's the idiot's choice. If you can't make a good argument, you make this argument.
I'll give you $1 million, Steve, if you can go find the book that gives a definition of a field in principle. And I don't mean
this, I don't mean that, I don't mean that, I don't mean this, right. I mean, again, Einstein's bent space is a field in principle. Space-time is a field in principle.
Maxwellian field equations. Maxwellian field equations never define a field. They are only expressions of field modalities.
Yes, they're only, yes, exactly. He didn't explain what the field was made of. He only said it's there, obviously. Obviously, the energy is being conveyed from one place to another place through a mechanism. He don't know what it is. He thought maybe ether, but I'm just saying he's still, and there's still the fact that there's energy moving from one place to another place.
As expressed over a vector over a given period of time with an end result. So the four Maxwellian field equations never define what the hell a field is, only how a field is expressed in effect over a vector.
Well, again, and it's he doesn't have to, because the energy. Let me put this the right way. Nobody accounts for the energy in the sense of how does the magnet make force. So if you do, I can account for it, because like I said, I'm saying it's a conversion of gravity into polarized gravity, essentially is what it is. And then that affects the electrons in the conductor and moves them, because it's polarized gravity and they're affected by polarization. So there's the mechanism that transmits the force, so they call it a force carrier. So a force carrier would be what the field is made out of, the force carrier. So I'm just saying, just because they have to call it virtual photons, and I can give you the better description, which is universal quanta, the energy that exists in the universe, that's the field.
With X amount of effect due to causation at a vector over a period of time. That's the easiest way to actually do it.
Right, and it's all exactly like a light bulb shining. So Einstein's bent space is like a light bulb shining. The force is stronger the closer you are. It operates like a straight line force. The force coming off of a magnet is a straight line force. Okay? I got these little magnets, right? Little tiny ones. And the funny thing is I can't pull them apart. That's how powerful they are. I have to slide them apart. I can't pull them apart. I mean, look, little tiny magnets. You can see that probably. 10 of them there. And I can't pull them apart. Can't do it. I mean, I could do it with pliers, or I tie a string to them, but you know, I mean, they're that strong. Little tiny motherfuckers.
Fine. Or lump the four Maxwellian field equations together. So, now let's quote Tricky Dicky, or Richard Feynman here. See,
So what do you want me to repeat? You want people to call you in the future Fatty Waddy? I mean, you know, it's just, don't you see just how tacky and small you're showing very small testicles, very small penis, and, you know, kind of a micro brain. Micro penis, micro brain. Not to figure out that this kind of argument is just fucking, I'd say it's infantile, but even infants aren't, they're not, they'll eat their own poo, but they won't do this.
Ultimately is only about energy, but energy is really only in reference to fields. And here is our trick.
Yes, energy is only in reference to force. So again, there's force in the universe. Gravity. Gravity is converted into polarized force by magnets, and it's converted into force at a frequency by electrons. That's the universe.
Dicky on energy. It is important to realize that in physics today...
He didn't have Einstein's accent, so, you know, yeah, more cheap shots.
We have no knowledge of what energy is.
It wasn't British either.
This is from the cult figurehead of quantum mechanics.
Right, and it's the truth. And so why do you ridicule him for a true statement? And even if you were to say your ether exists, you'd have no way to describe it as a fluid or a mechanism.